Excellent. So yes, welcome to the ECP Evenlode Catchment Partnership event. We're going to review the progress that we've made over the last 12 years with the Smarter Water Catchment initiative that the ECP has been running. So we're going to have various different speakers talking to you today. So let's just get the next slide. So yeah, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction into the project, the kind of overview from a Thames water perspective, and is then going to talk a little bit about the specifics within the Evenlode catchment, and then we've got a whole range of speakers talking through the different key themes that we've devised as part of our partnership. So I'm sure there'll be many questions as we go, so a little bit of housekeeping about how we're going to run the session today. So in terms of keeping microphones on mute, please, it will be a bit distracting for speakers, so please do put your microphones on mute. I would really encourage you to put any questions that crop up into the chat. So you should be able to get that chat function either by the bar at the bottom of the Zoom, or if you kind of hover up to the top, you should be able to open up the chat function there. It's just a great opportunity to kind of capture things in the moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of the workshop for about 20 minutes, and Anne Miller's going to kind of guide that. But if there are kind of anything as we go, speakers can kind of answer that after their slot, or there's a whole group of us here that can kind of chip in. So we're more than happy to answer as we go, but we'll pick up some of the key themes towards the end as well. Again, kind of keeping cameras off, it will help with the bandwidth and delivering the presentations. But again, if we get to the Q&A session, more than happy for people to put their hands up and come on camera, ask any questions that they've got as well. And yes, I mentioned about it being recorded. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit today about sort of setting the scene of the Smarter Water Catchment initiative, for those of you that aren't aware of the Thames Water scheme that we've been running over the last few years. So just again, hi, welcome. I'm Helena, Soteriou, for those of you that don't know me. I am the Catchment Programme Manager at Thames Water, so have oversight of our catchment management initiatives that we deliver. And we're going to talk to you a little bit today about kind of what are the sort of framework that we're trying to develop across the Thames region. So as you can see on the slide, most of you will be very familiar, particularly with the Evenlode catchment, but it is one of the 27 catchments that make up the Thames River Basin. And each of these have kind of local catchment partnerships. The ECP, the Evenlode Catchment Partnership, is one of these. And we're really looking at ways that we as a company can work in a closer relationship with local partners, and that is really where this initiative was born out of, is to understand kind of how we can co-create and co-deliver solutions together, so that we end up getting better kind of benefits that might be derived from that. So in terms of setting the scene, that as we will talk through today, there will be, and there are, a whole range of complicated issues and challenges, both in this catchment and other catchments, and we recognise that actually a lot of the solutions and expertise lie in multiple different organisations. Everybody has a small part to play, whether that's a knowledge base or whether that's kind of offering up opportunities to do something a little bit different. And the ECP and that framework, the catchment-based approach, really offers the kind of a model to be able to kind of start to unpick some of these challenges and work together to solve them. So that's really what we've been looking at as a company. We are investing £3 million in each of these trial catchments. So the Evenlode, 3 million, the Chest 3 million, and the Crane 3 million. So we're really looking at different ways of the kind of geographies and the demographics of these different catchments. The Chess is a chalk stream in Buckinghamshire, and the Crane is a West London catchment, which again is very different landscape to the Evenlode. We're really looking at different ways of how we can draw synergies out across these, so that hopefully we can expand this approach to more catchments after 2025 onwards. So that's the real kind of shaping of it. So talk about lots of different challenges. I'm sure you'll all be very aware within your own organisations and even a personal capacity of some of the challenges that we face in the Evenlode catchment. You know, diffuse sources of pollution, point sources of pollution, urbanisation changes to the landscape, flooding and the habitat connectivity and kind of local involvement and engagement with that. So lots of kind of complicated picture going on about you know, how we really look at improving the health of this water environment. A little bit about what we're really trying to achieve, particularly from a Thames water perspective in this project, is looking at how we can take a whole systems view of what's going on and kind of come together, as I said originally, and try and solve some of these problems. We really think that actually using more expertise, that the solutions will both be more kind of stretching in what they can achieve, and they will also expand to be able to achieve some of these multiple benefits as well. So we're really not trying to kind of silo and separate everything out. We really want that whole picture, because so many things are interlinked with each other. It becomes quite difficult to just, you know, you might lose sight of that overall picture if you start separating them out. So it's really what we've been trying to do. In terms of what it actually looks like in practice, so yeah, that's kind of the theory behind what we've been trying to do. So what does that mean for the period of 2020 to 2025? So there's a couple of things really. So we're really trying to involve as many people as possible and work with the ECP to really get them to concrete out that vision. And Anna's going to talk to you a little bit about what that vision looks like, but also what the kind of specific outcomes are that we've been you know, setting ourselves over a 10-year time frame. We've all worked very hard over the last 12 months certainly, but prior to that as well, getting our catchment plan agreed and published on the website. So if you aren't able to click on these links, we can put it in the chat as we go, the link to that catchment plan, and you'll be able to see all of the suite of things that we've kind of set ourselves as a collective to deliver, and really looking at making sure that it's not just kind of one individual organisation delivering on this, that there's multiple different organisations that have a part to play. And then when we talk about delivering the plan, what our focus over the last 12 months particularly has been was around kind of really identifying the governance of how this whole model could work, particularly for the Evenlode catchment, working with different partners to identify who's going to be delivering what, and then really trying to capitalise on different projects and schemes that are perhaps have the potential to be delivered or are already being delivered, and trying to bring that into the mixer as well, so that we've got this real kind of holistic picture of how to improve the Evenlode catchment. Just talk a little bit about how this approach is different. So particularly we're looking at this from an outcomes perspective. So rather than saying we need to deliver this one small part, what we're actually saying is we need to improve the whole kind of river Evenlode environment, and actually there are multiple different outcomes that we need to look at in order to deliver that. So we've kind of flipped it on its head a little bit. In terms of decision-making powers, this whole partnership has a collective voice. We have a representative body that sits on a steering group and decides how funding is spent and how decisions get made. So this isn't a solely Thames Water project at all. We each have an equal say the 7 or 8 of us that sit on that steering group. And beneath that, we've got a whole breadth of different subgroups that make up each of these focus areas, really to home in on particular things like our water quality subgroup, for example. So I'm going to hand over now to Anne Barkley, who's going to give you a little bit of an overview of the ECP, as well as talking to you about the project specifics in the evening. Anne?
Yes, sorry about that. I had to get rid of that phone call, which you probably heard. Thanks, Helena. Hello, I work for Wild Oxfordshire as the Evenlode Catchment Partnership Project Manager, and I'm going to talk briefly about the process of developing the catchment plan and how it is being governed and the projects delivered by the partnership. Next slide, please. The ECP had developed a strategy focusing on 4 main themes: water quality, biodiversity, habitat and landscape, natural flood management, and education, access and recreation. However, all these themes have areas where they overlap, which is where partnership working works so well. Overarching all these themes is the work to monitor and collect data and evidence, and ultimately to communicate what's happening to the partnership and the wider catchment, something that we're working on to improve. We started working on developing the catchment plan in detail in the beginning of 2021. Next slide, please. Within each of the 4 themes, there are subgroups, under the headings of which we came up with a long list of projects that we wanted to see happen over the next 10-year period. Many of these projects were already in the concept stage, but we just hadn't the resources to take them any further. Eventually, we produced a plan for delivering these projects across the life of the plan and for each of the themes. Next slide, please. This is an example page from the catchment plan, just showing the actions or milestones for the education, access and recreation projects. And the whole plan runs to several pages of actions, and you can find it on Wild Oxfordshire website, as well as obviously we'll pop it into the chat. Generally, the first year has been more about establishing ourselves, collecting data and getting baseline information for the catchment. And going forward, we're working on more project delivery on the ground. Next slide, please. So partnership working generally results in slower progress, and we had little funding to work with. And we were working with very many volunteers with limited time to give, which put a limit on what we could actually achieve in the past. So as the workload has quickly increased with the Smarter Water Catchment funding, along with the expectations, we've had to put a good chunk of the funding into increasing the resourcing, both for the hosting and coordinating roles and for driving the themes forward. This has been the real game changer for the partnership. So new funding has meant a large increase in the host and coordination role for Wild Oxfordshire, in addition to being the theme leads for biodiversity and natural flood management. And we now have the equivalent of 2 full-time posts. Earthwatch have taken on the water quality theme lead with an additional 1.5 new posts, and Cotswolds National Landscape have taken on the education theme lead and have employed 3 new staff. In addition, we fund some staff time in Natural England under the Catchment Sensitive Farming Initiative and facilitation time in the farm cluster, which has all strengthened our partnership working. As Helena said earlier, we have a steering group made up of a representative section of the partnership, including the theme leads that make the final decisions, but the working groups for all 4 themes plan, steer and deliver the projects. These working groups are formed from a wider selection of specialists and interested partners taken from the wider partnership. For example, the water quality working group that Helena mentioned has actually 15 members. So we can achieve better communication across the catchment. We're working on a new and improved website and developing communication plans. We will now look at the work being delivered across all of the 4 themes in more detail. So I will hand over to Eoghan Concannon, from wild Oxfordshire. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming along. So my name is Eoghan Concannon and I'm a project officer for Wild Oxfordshire on the ECP project. Today I'm going to set the scene in relation to water quality on the Evenlode catchment. Next slide, please. So when I arrived in Oxford for my first time earlier this year, to say I was shocked and surprised to learn about the poor health of Evenlode catchment would be a bit of an understatement. In today's day and age, I find it hard to believe that in a well-developed area like Oxford, that the state of its water environment can be left so neglected, leading to its extensive deterioration. Poor water quality continues to be the key issue holding back the recovery of the River Evenlode and its tributaries. This pervasive and insidious decline in water quality must be tackled as a first priority in its restoration. However, water quality pollution is not the only pressure on the river catchment. There is a profound cumulative stress on the Evenlode from all directions in the form of weather extremes leading to floods and drought, invasive species like signal crayfish, and especially over-dredging and man-made modifications, which are known to have long-lasting adverse effects on water wildlife. While the ECP is targeting these wider catchment issues in its action plan, as a group, we are seriously concerned that these wider restoration initiatives will be fruitless if not combined with immediate action to reduce sewage pollution and other pollution sources. Pollution on the Evenlode catchment mainly stems from wastewater from sewage treatment works, which is also known as point source pollution. Multiple sewage treatment works around the Evenlode are dysfunctional as they have never been upgraded and do not have a sufficient storage capacity to match the increasing rate of urbanization over the last few decades. These works need larger storm tanks to deal with the increased volumes of sewage coming into the works, especially at times of high rainfall when raw sewage is released untreated into the river environment. These raw or partially treated spills are only supposed to occur during high rainfall events, a specific time when the water industry is not required to treat sewage and hence allowed to spill. However, evidence from our partners have found that untreated spills are occurring during dry weather events also. At the same time, sewage treatment works on the Evenlode catchment don't treat for P or lack phosphorus stripping capability. Sorry, P refers to phosphorus for anyone who's not aware. This means that even treated effluent still contains high levels of phosphorus that reaches the river after its treatment. Between September 2019 and June 2020, 9 sewage treatment works spilled untreated sewage into the Evenlode for roughly 8,500 hours. That's nearly a full year of untreated sewage entering the river. And this came from Professor Peter Hammond, a member of the ECP. Unsustainable urban development around the Evenlode catchment has occurred at the costly expense of the natural water environment and the multiple ecosystem services it provides to people. Around 65% of monitored pollution originates from these incompetent works. However, other sources of pollution on the catchment come from diffuse pollution from the way we manage our land, where around 30% of monitored pollution originates from. Many plots and estates of land around the Evenlode catchment cumulatively release soil and other sediments into watercourses as they are managed intensively for food production year after year, which leads to gradual soil erosion and loss, which can further deteriorate aquatic ecosystems. Next slide, please. So in 2021, the ECP released a water quality statement, which highlighted many Evenlode catchment stakeholders' concerns of ongoing declines in water quality. The outcome of this position paper highlighted where multiple sewage treatment works are failing and why. An updated version for 2022 is currently being prepared by the ECP, and it asks that locals and the wider public write to the water industry, their local MPs, and other authorities to ensure that the water industry make sure that several sewage treatment works around the Evenlode catchment get upgraded to the necessary standard so that the Evenlode is given a chance to recover and provide habitat for wildlife and benefits to people. The ECP would like to give its thanks and support to neighbouring water quality campaign group, WASP, or Windrush Against Sewage Pollution, for their work in advocating for an end to sewage pollution on the Windrush catchment in the greater Oxford area. They set a great example of how communities can come together to halt declines in the local river ecosystem. If you want to join this campaign, please visit the Windrush Against Sewage Pollution WASP website. Given the sensitive nature of the Evenlode and the alarming decline in freshwater biodiversity, we are confident the ECP will work towards the Evenlode's restoration, and we expect our governmental partners, including the Environment Agency, and our water industry partners, including Thames Water, to work with us fully to comply with legislation and regulations to find a resolution to stop pollution events. With around 30 active partners and more, the ECP is in a great position to influence positive change. We are also building a case to highlight the impact of increased housing development on poor quality discharges from sewage works and pumping stations. It has become apparent that neither the local authority, Environment Agency, or Thames Water have any real control over increased loading to already overstretched sewage networks. Please get in touch with the Evenlode Catchment Partnership via the Wild Oxfordshire website if you would like to be updated on these developments, or if you would like to participate in the ECP project. We ask that anyone interested in the project to come and contact us and help us to recover the Evenlode. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'm now going to hand over to Heather from Earthwatch, an active partner of the Evenlode Catchment Partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Owen. Hi, everyone. My name's Heather Moorhouse. I'm the Freshwater Watch Research Lead at Earthwatch. To introduce us, we're an environmental NGO, and we've been very much part of the water quality monitoring programme and synthesising water quality data. And the presentation today, I'm going to highlight some of our main findings of a water quality report that my colleagues at Earthwatch and partners in the water quality subgroup have helped put together, and will soon be publicly available. Next slide, please, Helen. So in terms of monitoring water quality in the Evenlode, since around the mid-1970s, this graph in the left-hand corner shows that the Environment Agency have conducted a lot of measurements, and here this is showing phosphate measurements, and we've focused a lot in the report on phosphates because of their role in nutrient enrichment and consequent impacts on fresh waters. So again, back to the graph, you can see that the Environment Agency began monitoring in the catchment since around the mid-1970s, and this monitoring peaked in the 1990s, but has steadily declined, like a lot of long-term monitoring throughout the UK due to lack of government investing, but they still continue to monitor today. And the big peak in the darker blue shows the increase in citizen science monitoring in the Evenlode. And this is citizen scientists that have been trained to use the Freshwater Watch method, a program we employ here at Earthwatch, where we train citizen scientists to collect nitrate and phosphate measurements in the field, as well as turbidity and other river characteristics. And since around 2015, we began a water blitz event across the whole of the Thames catchment, of which the Evenlode is part. And this one-off weekend event has expanded, and you can see it peaks in around 2018, and a lot of these measurements were taken. However, now we have citizen scientists who are taking routine monthly measurements, and they're forming a lot more in terms of quantity of measurements than the Environment Agency, and so they're supporting the regulatory monitoring and providing a vital and necessary gap. And again, this is reflected in the map, which shows other monitoring that has occurred in the catchment alongside the Environment Agency, including the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which has also been monitoring throughout the Thames. But you can see in the blue dots that the Freshwater Watch monitoring sites are extremely abundant, and so this is incredible data and evidence that we can and is being used to understand water quality in the Evenlode. Next slide, please, Helena. So what do we know? Well, the Environment Agency in their last cycle of Water Framework Directive classifications found that the 18 water bodies that make up the Evenlode catchment, none were achieving good ecological status. And indeed, all were failing in terms of the chemical status for their surface water bodies. And we know from the Thames Water Catchment Plan that approximately 65% of phosphates is coming from sewage treatment works. And this has been supported by the monitoring data and what citizen scientists have found. So here we have a map of Milton under Wychwood sewage treatment works, and the dots are phosphate measurements. And you can see above, if you could click on that, Helena, above the sewage treatment work, so before the Little Stock Brook feeds into past the sewage treatment works, you see lower phosphate concentrations. And then below, next, thanks, Helena. Below you can see darker colours, so higher phosphate concentrations. And this is from citizen science data and monitoring that has occurred since 2017. So by looking at above and below sewage treatment works, we have shown that these are having a key role here in delivering phosphates into the water bodies. Next slide, please, Helena. But more than that, because there's been regular monthly sampling, we're also showing or seeing seasonal differences. And again, this is from the same site as the map above, and you can see that above the sewage treatment works, concentrations are below the recommended value of 0.1 milligrams per litre. But below the sewage treatment works, they're typically above, and these kind of peak from the summer months onwards. And this is when rainfall is much lower in the catchment, so it's concentrating the effects of nutrients. So what this tells us is that as summer, brooks or certain rivers and tributaries are particularly more vulnerable to nutrient inputs. And we found that in other sites throughout the catchment as well. And it also points to the influence of continued emissions. So there's been a lot of attention on spills, and what we found is that this is quite complicated, but it is likely that continuous release of effluent is having this kind of impact. And the graph from Morton in the marsh to the right there, in the bars is the total spill hours, and the phosphate concentrations, again below the sewage treatment works. They're not correlated to the spills, but they're certainly showing higher values. So this highlights the kind of complexity of relationships and trying to pinpoint kind of when emissions are having the most impact. Next slide, please, Helena. But also, we'd like to highlight the role of non-point pollution as well. And this graph here shows nitrate values. Nitrates another limiting nutrient in fresh waters. So again, their addition can lead to enrichment and other impacts. And this shows nitrates from a monitoring site along the Glyme at Button. And unlike the phosphates in the previous slide, which show increases in summer, we're seeing increases in kind of winter months. And what this indicates is that rainfall could be delivering this nutrient into the river here. And this could be from agricultural runoff, for example. But we also know that there's a lot of septic tanks and private discharges in the catchment as well. And these are much harder to monitor because there's not the inventory. And so in order to kind of look at the role of non-point pollution, the more monitoring we have, the better, because it really helps us to pick out where different drivers are having different impacts. Next slide, please, Helena. So the next stage is for us. We have a summary report of kind of our findings so far that will be publicly available, but our work is continuing and we hope to kind of expand and develop our monitoring program and what we can learn from the monitoring data, because it really is important to kind of evidence and help pinpoint where measures need to be taken. And one thing that we'd love people in the Evenlode catchment to do is become a citizen scientist. And this map shows in green, the shaded areas is where we have lots of monitoring ongoing, but in red is where we have less monitoring occurring. And this is monitoring of from the Environment Agency and Freshwater Watch. So if anyone is particularly interested, Helena, if you could click on the, you know, we're interested in measuring sites along Longborough Stream, Blederton Brook, Haythorpe, the River Dawn, and Blenheim Lakes as well. So please get involved. Our email us at water@earthwatch.org.uk. And that's all from me. So I'd like to pass over to Joe Old at the Environment Agency, who's going to talk about natural flood management.
So hi everyone. Yeah, so I'm Joe Old from the Environment Agency and I'm the Evenlode Catchment Coordinator and Project Manager. So as Anne said at the start, in this integration of smarter water catchments and the Evenlode Catchment Partnership, it was really essential that the ambitions of the many organisations of the Evenlode Catchment Partnership were translated into those 4 key themes that Anne set out and that you're going to be hearing about today. And it was essential in that the EA, as a founding member of the Evenlode Catchment Partnership, to ensure our objectives and existing projects to improve water quality, biodiversity and reducing flood risk were really embedded within the Smarter Water Catchment strategy. And as such, we really fully engaged in that co-creation that Helena mentioned, in the writing of the narrative and the milestones for this natural flood management theme, and also the river floodplain reconnection project, which you'll hear about in the later theme. And I, like many others, now sit on the steering group to be like a key influencer on the decisions of the £3 million spend in the Evenlode. So the Smarter Water Catchment trial is providing a real driver, a match funding source for many partners within the Evenlode Catchment Partnership to deliver projects with the many interconnected outcomes, and ultimately will deliver a landscape in the Evenlode which is much more resilient to flood risk pressures being generated by climate change and population growth. So this is really delivering integrated catchment management and is building on what CABA, catchment-based approach, and catchment partnerships, which were set up by DEFRA 6 years ago, to do. So next slide, please, Helena. So the natural flood management theme, well, it's about delivering natural solutions to manage floodwaters in the landscape, upstream of flood-prone communities, and at the same time delivering benefits for water quality by capturing diffuse sediment and phosphate runoff, habitat creation, carbon sequestration, community recreation, and also the benefits of the farming business itself. So it's just this multitude of benefits that natural flood management projects can bring. So on this slide, we're looking at the Little Stop Brook natural flood management project. It's a small and flashy clay tributary catchment in the River Evenlode. And back in 2007, the community of Milton under Wychwood was badly flooded, as you can see in that top right image. But at that time, a traditional flood scheme was not viable. It wasn't cost effective for 12 houses that were at flood risk. But 10 years on, in 2016, natural flood management presented an alternative flood risk solution, and also the catchment partnerships had been formed, and that was an alternative delivery model. So next slide, please. So what is natural flood management and what did we do? So we needed to look at the whole catchment upstream of Milton under Wychwood, and through walkovers with the landowner, the farm manager, and using these surface water flow maps, we identified wet areas and overland flow routes, which could be slowed and the sediment trap too, and temporarily stored by natural flood management interventions. So you can see on that on this image the where they have been intercepted, and you can see the storages there marked on. So thankfully, the Bruin estate were very aware of their own surface water issues, and they were really supportive of trialling innovative interventions which worked with their farming business and their agri-environment schemes. So having the land and having those landowner connections, which is great through the catchment partnership delivery model and this wider Smarter Water Catchment, is really essential. So between 2016 and 2021, we delivered soil management measures, nutrient retention ponds and traps in fields. We constructed 15 bunds and scrapes in riparian field corners. We installed woody dams in the channel to create 27 leaky dams. We planted 14 hectares of new riparian woodland, and we did an agroforestry trial with Bruin Estate. And all of these measures together provide a total of 30,000 metres cubed of storage upstream of Milton under Wychwood. And yet this is a representation of all of those measures. And this is taken from an interpretation boards that are put on the footpaths for the local community, which Anne got made as part of the project. Next slide, please. So a key part of this natural flood management project was to share the learning, to demonstrate. It was a demonstration, it was a trial. And so the results, did it work? Is NFM effective? So we had hydraulic modelling done, which did show that flood depths have been reduced, damages have been reduced, and we've delayed the onset of flooding for those houses in Milton under Wychwood. And most significant benefits at the low order events of 1 in 30 type event. In terms of water quality, the online ponds and flood storage areas can trap significant volumes of sediment and phosphate. A PhD student's been studying that. He's written actually a couple of academic papers, and there are measurements along the lines of 87 tons of sediment and 128 kilograms of phosphorus being stored. And he's looked into the design of those measures and the maintenance requirements. So there's some really good detailed information coming out of this trial. In terms of biodiversity net gain, it's increased by 30%. Because 31 hectares of habitat has been enhanced because of grass margins, no till being done, and cover crops being used. 29 hectares of new habitat have been created by arable reversion, and those 14 hectares of woodland. So it's really changed that landscape for the benefit of biodiversity alongside the flood risk and water quality. And with the woodland planting, we've also had a carbon assessment done. And by by 2100, the Evenlode NFM scheme would have resulted in a net removal of carbon dioxide of about 8,000 tonnes. So yeah, in terms of that drive for carbon sequestration, natural flood management can really benefit too. So the project was submitted to Flood and Coast Awards, and we won that for climate resilient places. And again, that's been great to just share the Evenlode Catchment Partnership as a successful delivery model, and just to share the learning and get more of these schemes replicated. And most importantly, it's been to showcase to other landowners, to inspire other landowners and communities to participate in these natural flood management projects. And so we've had a really good link with Farm Ed, and we did a water resilience one-day course for landowners to come along and hear about various aspects of working with the water in the landscape. But yeah, natural flood management measures was definitely part of that. So yeah, there's very much this kind of sharing of the learning, and that is what Smarter Water Catchments is allowing us to do, is to replicate these schemes. Next slide, please. So I think a link has been put into, so the video link to that project has been put in. It's a 2-minute video link, which is probably the best way to see the project actually. And I think Rhiannon's put that in the chat if you want to look at that after. So all of these slides, I just wanted to really emphasize the people aspect of natural flood management. So all of these slides have people in them. The project has been really people focused throughout. So from the parish council initiating the project, the local residents sharing their experiences of flooding and hosting the monitoring equipment, the citizen scientists and community groups undertaking the tree planting there in the image and the willow spiraling, and the PhD students undertaking their research. It's having the community engaged in a natural flood management project is really key. Next slide, please. So how does this all fit in with Smarter Water Catchments? Well, Smarter Water Catchment has, the funding is enabling us more NFM schemes to be pursued across the Evenlode catchment. So to replicate, as I said, what we've done in Milton under Wychwood for other rural communities. And one of those communities is Bleddington, which was flooded badly in 2020. The image shows the flood zones surrounding the community of Bleddington and the flow pathways which can be intercepted, slowed and stored. Potential floodplain reconnection and filled bund locations are being identified to enhance that floodplain storage in key locations upstream of Bleddington. The Smarter Water Catchment funding is being used as a match funding source with the Environment Agency, Environment and Flood Risk programmes, and also Gloucestershire County Councils to bring this really integrated package of works alongside our traditional flood risk scheme components, and also alongside the channel maintenance at key conveyance locations and works to improve the Thames water sewer networks. So it's this catchment partnership working and Smarter Water Catchments ways of working really brings, like Helena and Anne said, brings experts together, funding sources together, and just allows us to deliver these kind of multi-benefit projects for communities. As well as Bleddington, we're also piloting some interventions with the Batsford estate this year, and that would ultimately help reduce flow pathways upstream of Moreton in the Marsh. So yeah, so that's what we're doing in terms of the natural flood management theme. Sorry, I think I'm handing over to myself. So sorry about this. You've got a double whammy of the Environment Agency. So yeah, so I think I'm kicking off the biodiversity, habitat and landscape theme. So in this theme, I work really closely with my fisheries and biodiversity colleagues and the Evenlode Catchment Partnership to deliver river and floodplain restoration projects. So as explained in the previous NFM theme, a key ambition of the Environment Agency was to embed these Evenlode river landscape restoration projects, which are largely funded under the Environment Agency's Environment Programme, but we wanted to embed them within this Smarter Water Catchment plan so that we could pool resources and skills and match fund bigger and more innovative schemes in the landscape. So although this was focused on river restoration, we need to look at landscape measures to restore our rivers. So every 1 kilometre of a river drains on average 50 hectares of adjacent land, and 70% of our land in England is agricultural. So our rural landscapes play a crucial role in our ambitions of achieving a more naturally functioning and resilient rivers and streams. Next slide, please. So the bottom two images in this slide represent the challenges our rivers face. So they're impacted by direct in-channel physical modifications, but also by poor and intensive land management from the watershed through to their channel banks. Whereas the top two images show the wide natural riparian corridors and reconnected floodplains. So to restore our rivers, we need to think about the river channel and the floodplain as a connected system. And we need to look upslope at the land use and soil health for solutions in the wider catchment and landscapes they drain. How we manage the land in our catchments is as important, if not more important, than how we manage the catchment itself. Next slide, please. So it's thought that historically rivers' flows were naturally spread across whole wooded valley floors in many small, shallow channels, as shown in that top image. So this was before the landscape was deforested, releasing vast volumes of sediment, and before channels were modified with many flow control structures, which trapped these huge volumes of sediment and created artificially raised floodplains and incised single thread channels, as shown in that bottom image. So that's the ambition. It's to reconnect the river with its whole valley floor, to allow water and sediments to flow over as large a surface area as possible without creating a lake, to produce a complex, ever-changing kind of mosaic of wet and dry habitats with multiple small, shallow channels. Next slide, please. This image shows some modelling which Atkins have undertaken for the whole of the Evenlode catchment and is accessible on a web portal, which we can share the link to as well. It highlights the locations where floodplain reconnection projects would be most suitable in terms of the physical landscape, so the slopes, the geology, and is a starting point for engaging landowners to consider a scheme on their floodplain fields. So in this image, it's the paler blue locations are where that floodplain connection would be most suitable. The darker blue, it's more likely to pond, and the yellows and greens are too elevated to connect to the channel. So yeah, so this is what we have mapped for the whole of the Evenlode and its tributaries. Next slide, please. So one such project is on the River Dawn with the Blenheim Estate. So last autumn, 4 beaver analogue dams, which is where willow branches have been packed into the channel with earth packed over that. So, you know, yeah, trying to be a beaver, what they would do in a channel if we had them. And they were put into the incised channel along with scrapes into the floodplain just upstream of them. And that has really encouraged the River Dawn to spill out of its channel more frequently and to utilise its whole valley floor more of the time. It's very much a trial and is being intensively monitored to understand the effectiveness of the reconnection on numerous aspects, including hydrology, the fisheries, floodplain habitat creation, and the interplay with the farming business. Can it be grazed to the same extent that it was? Or you know, how is the floodplain habitat working with the farming business? Sharing the learning and showcasing these projects is a fantastic way to encourage more landowners to consider doing the same. So we have taken various groups to see this project. Tim Field, who you're going to hear from later, invited his farm cluster group along, and I think it really helped to actually just see it on the ground and to really help to enthuse those farmers to the extent that they actually have submitted a landscape recovery scheme bid to the new elm schemes that are happening. So yeah, I think the showcasing and learning of these types of projects is really fundamental to get more done. Next slide, please. This is a second project which was delivered this spring at Brookend Farm, and alongside of these we have two other projects at Hordley Meadows and Cornwell Brook, which are at the design stage. So I think the key message is we need to give our rivers space. We need to give them space to utilise their whole floodplains, to naturally slow and dissipate their flows, their sediment loads and their energy, rather than being confined into these single channels where they are acting like a fire hose shooting through the landscape. And in terms of smarter water catchment, by embedding these projects into the Smarter Water Catchment plan, it's enabling us to do more of it and in a more integrated way as a catchment partnership. So thank you. And I'm handing over to Anne Barkley.
Thanks very much, Jo. So along with the river restoration projects that we've been working closely with Jo, I have to apologise for the cat. I can't do anything about this. We've been working very closely with landowners and Natural England, and we realised there was a gap in the funding for wetland creation, a habitat that's declined massively over recent years. So to encourage landowners to keep more water on the land, the ECP have commissioned Atkins to design a wetland creation initiative to provide grants to do this. The main idea of this scheme is that it's farmer and landowner led to help, with help from the ECP to achieve this, in line with our 4 themes, which improve water quality, create habitat for wildlife, reduce flood risk, and improve opportunities for education, access and recreation. So the scheme was designed last year and we're now running a pilot this year. Oh, sorry, I should have said next slide, please, before then. Yeah, that's fine. So basically it's a location-led design, and a handbook has been designed showing 4 typical wetland types. So if we can have the next slide, please. Yeah, so the handbook sets out in more detail how to create the wetlands and where best to locate them. So I'll describe the concept in brief. There's an initial flyer to advertise the scheme and show where to download the handbook. And then there's an expression of interest, which landowners can send in to us, and then catchment advisors will visit to discuss the ideas. They then need to fill in an application form. And then a review board will decide which schemes are most likely to succeed and pick about 5 schemes per year with up to about £20,000 funding. And the Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment will hold and distribute the grants. So once the schemes have been chosen, the design can be refined if required, with specialist input if necessary, although we expect the designs to be farmer-led and kept simple. We'll help them obtain permissions and permits, and then the landowner stroke farmer will implement the scheme directly using their own labour and kit, or they can use contractors, and there will be some input on the ground from specialists where needed. the scheme will be checked and signed off and the money's paid out. Next slide, please. So this is also Brook End Farm, which Joe was talking about for the River Connection project, but we also delivered some new wetlands. There was an existing online pond and we've extended it to create 2 new ponds which are interconnected with channels, and that will help settle out sediments and nutrients and improve water quality downstream. And we've also created separate scrapes, and these lie wet in winter and dry up in summer. And it's important to have these diverse wetland habitats to increase the different species that will colonise these areas. They also give us more storage in high rainfall events. Next slide, please. So the bottom photo is a newly created field corner bund to trap surface water runoff from an arable field. And it was an area that sat wet during the winter. The landowner has made it deeper to hold water for longer. The main picture is a pond which is simply fed by field drains that we've interrupted by cutting into. And then just a sort of brief mention that in addition to the wetland creation, we're actually providing some funding to build leaky woody dams to help the brooks reconnect with the floodplain more easily, as Joe was explaining earlier, especially where they're incised. And also this will help slow the flows. Next slide, please. So another gap that we discovered was that where landowners had species-rich meadows, they couldn't actually receive any additional funding under the Countryside Stewardship Scheme unless they were recorded on the Habitats Priority Layer. And to do so, they need to get their meadows surveyed. So we're planning funding surveys all the way along the floodplain of the Evenlode, Glyne and Dawn valleys. These have started with either quick walkovers or desktop studies where the surveyors have identified the meadows that required more detailed survey in spring before the hay is cut. And this will lead to a comprehensive view of the state of wet meadows and will show where efforts should best be concentrated on any restoration schemes. And we're also hoping to encourage more wading birds along these corridors. And it all links to the landscape scale river restoration work that we're doing with the EA and the ambitions for the catchment, which the farm cluster are spearheading. So thank you. I'll now hand over to Ellen Fake from Natural England.
Hello, is that all right? Can everyone hear and see me?
Yeah, all good, Ellen.
Thank you, Helena. So hello, I'm Ellen Fake. I newly joined the catchment sensitive farming team in February, and I now work alongside Ros Garner in the Cotswolds and in the Vale of the White Horse catchments within the Thames Solent CSF team. So just a quick sort of introduction to catchment sensitive farming and CSF. So next slide, please. So CSF, catchment sensitive farming, is a partnership between DEFRA and the Environment Agency and is led by Natural England. CSF's role is to work with farmers, land managers and our partners in high and medium priority water areas to address water quality, air quality, and we also now cover the remit of natural flood mitigation. And our role essentially is now to hopefully guide our land managers and farmers through the agri-transition. CSF also aims to lead farmers to achieve the goals of the 25-year environment plan. CSF recognises that our assets from nature are intrinsically interconnected, and our hope is that our collaborative endeavours will achieve the goals of the 25-year environment plan, which includes clean air, clean and plentiful water, thriving plants and wildlife, reducing risks from environmental hazards, using natural resources sustainably and efficiently, enhancing beauty, heritage and engagement with our natural environments, mitigating and adapting to climate change. So overall, we've had some really exciting projects, which I'm sure you've already heard about. But a recent statistic, which we're very proud of, is that our work as a CSF programme has now contributed to a 34% reduction in pesticides in our watercourses. So next slide, please. So essentially, CSF has just undergone a huge expansion, in terms of advisors on the ground available to land managers, and also in terms of the areas which our funding can now cover. So on your screens on the left is phase 4, which was our first phase of CSF, in which the areas covered only stemmed to those in the red, our high priority areas. As of February, and coupled with a formal launch in October of this year, we now cover both the high and medium priority areas for water quality, which means any farmer or land manager in the high or medium priority is eligible for CSF water quality items. So it's really exciting that we can now hopefully aid more of our land managers to improving their water and air quality. So next slide. So the most important thing I think to address today is that, typically CSF can be seen as just an instrument for capital items like roofing, concrete, guttering, but actually our most important tool is the farm managers, the land managers. Essentially, it's all of you with us today. So most importantly, our partners that we work with include obviously the Evenlode Catchment Partnership. As I cover the whole of the Cotswolds, we also have the Windrush Catchment Partnership. Importantly, obviously the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster Group, TOW. We've also been helping in the Evenlode Wetland Creation Scheme, which Anne has just been discussing. Yesterday, we had a really productive meeting talking about the benefits of the Wetland Creation Scheme and how that will look going forward. Also several other projects that we're also part of, the Smarter Water Catchments with Thames Water, and various other groups and partnerships and organisations which we are very lucky to work with in the local area, such as Oxfordshire, BBOUT, FarmEd, Atkins, our district councils, and the Farm and Carbon Toolkit. So next slide, please. Thank you. So essentially, it's just a quick introduction to what catchment sensitive farming is, and how we can help you in terms of government tools, in terms of collaborating and linking with other land managers in your local area. If you did have any questions, that's my contact details, and I obviously cover the catchment with Ros Garner, and those are her details as well. Thank you very much. I'll move on to Tim.
Magic. Thank you very much. So hi, yeah, I'm Tim. I helped set up the North East Cotswold Farmer Cluster about 18 months ago, and more officially about a year ago, with a little help from Smarter Water Catchments and the farmers themselves. We're well underway. But today I'm just going to focus in on a couple of projects. The Landscape Recovery Project, which has been mentioned already in the immortal words of Patrick Vallance. Please, next slide. Thank you. And that is the North East Cotswold Farm Cluster. The catchment boundary, we've already seen a couple of slides. Those fields in red are in our partnership. The HFLSI is in yellow, and the World Heritage Site in red, and the AONB in pale blue. This was actually submitted as part of a landscape recovery pilot proposal that went in a couple of months ago. This, as mentioned, is a very exciting project. I think there were 50-odd projects that were submitted, and there's about to be 15 successful projects announced, possibly tomorrow. And the Evenlode is one of those, and it wouldn't have been submitted if it wasn't for the extraordinary amount of work that's gone in through the ECP to do this modelling, the baseline surveys and everything else, but also those incredible case studies as well. So, for instance, the Dawn that Joe was mentioning, and Bruin, it's all come together very nicely. And what we've done as a cluster, which started out probably 12 months ago with a couple of dozen members, it's now up to 106. is to try and take those great examples of capital projects and amplify them, introduce new members, new farmers to this work by previous speakers, but not just capital items. It's very, very important that farmers understand, once this investment's been made or funded, how is it going to be sustained? How is it going to be managed? And what's in it for them? Because, you know, with climate change and the frequency of flooding going up and the importance of phosphate stripping and everything else out of the watercourse, this is going to have to be done at huge scale. And at the moment we're fiddling around at the edges. We need to do this across the whole floodplain, across all the way up the tributaries. And that requires quite a lot of revenue payments if we're looking for arable reversion and so on. My personal belief, if we were to do this across the country, is the government are simply not going to be able to pay for it. So that's the idea of landscape recovery, is to bring in private sources of funding as well as the public sources of funding to make significant landscape land use change. And so the project we submitted was across 50 farms and covered 3,200 hectares, so a proportion of each of those 50 farms, most of it in the floodplain, but also up the steep slopes and so on. And next slide, please, and we'll just see what that looks like. That's what it looks like if it's stripped out. The blue fields are arable fields, and the dark green are woodlands, and light green are permanent pasture. And so you can see we're really focused in on that flood zone. You can see the flood zone in yellow. And how are we doing that? So an example, if you go to the next slide, hopefully, yes, great, is the natural capital markets. So land use change, say from arable to permanent pasture, increases soil carbon, and that soil carbon can be traded on the markets, either insetting or offsetting. And so a year ago, or 9 months ago, we kicked off with the great help of FIPL, Farming Protected Landscape, funding 15,000 hectares of soil carbon baselining across that area. You can see the fields that are partaking, not the ones in blue, but the ones in multicolored. Yellow, that's rape. Dark green, that's winter wheat. Light green is often barley. Anyway, across the way, we've taken 5 years worth of land use data and model that baseline carbon, so that if we're going into land use change or regenerative farming techniques, we can try to start to capitalize on it and bring investment in from other quarters. This is one of those objectives on our milestones with the Smarter Water Catchment. If you flip onto the next slide, please. And the other areas that we'll be looking at, I'm not going to repeat the words that have just been said, but this is basically to echo what's already been said. Wetlands, reconnection of floodplains, targeting water voles, waders, curlews, so on, and to just try and restore and recover that landscape nature. There'll be some quite targeted things. It's very ambitious carbon targets with the landscape recovery, so there will be some tree planting, lots of hedgerows to slow down the flow, and so on. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, I think the slides got slightly jumbled up, apologies. The transition from some of this land use, arable, into permanent grassland, for instance, after 20 years, you can tell from this research that we've been doing with the Rothamsted Research Institute that the stock of carbon is going up from roughly 150 tonnes per hectare to 200 tonnes per hectare. And in CO2 equivalents, that's 50 tonnes increase over 20 years. That's what's that, 2.5 tonnes in the ground each year per hectare. But in CO2 equivalent, that can be times by 3.6 to actually get your tradable tonne of carbon. So there's a lot of opportunity in the Evenlode to take some of this land, slow the flow both in woody debris dams and reconnecting the floodplain, the river to the floodplain, but also through this shift in regenerative farming and in some instance arable reversion as well. Something which is often challenged is the valuing of current and existing stocks of carbon and actually valuing existing habitats as well. There's an awful lot of money out there to turn something that's degraded into something that's nice and shiny and new and stuffed full of wildlife. But once it's created, making that work for a landowner is a lot harder. And we've had recent examples where you can game the system and actually revert it back to a degraded habitat and then turn it back into a shiny habitat again and claim the extra money. So that's what we are, as a cluster, as a group, we are very mindful that we should be rewarding this good habitat that's holding back the water, cleaning the water, storing carbon, and producing food as well. Not to forget, production of food is so important. That's what this the facilitation of the cluster is all about. So next slide, please. The other projects, also linking partly to what we're doing in the Smarter Water Catchments and the ECP, the Linum subcluster habitat restoration. That's a nice instance of co-funding or blended funding. We've got CS options in there across 5 farms. We've got FIPL funding to do what the CS didn't do. We've got Anne has received some proposals for some woody debris dams and some wetland creation projects, and also a biodiversity net gain project, hopefully as well, in the pipeline. So it's a demonstration of actually how these pools of funding can all come together and really, make each other work and complement each other for everyone's benefit. The other projects, relevant Windrush floodplain meadows, it's very good to really keep focused on our own catchment and target the opportunities in our catchment, but it's also very valuable to look over the hill and see what others are doing. They've got some very high value floodplain meadows the other side of the hill in the Windrush Valley, and vice versa. They're learning a lot from what we're up to as well. The cluster actually stretches both catchments. And we would hope to be doing some sort of green hay exchange and all sorts of things like that, and learning from one another about optimal grassland management, grazing, and so on, flying herds, flying flocks of sheep, and so on. Next slide, please. I think I've got another one. Yes, I have. I've got another 2, I think. The other thing that the cluster does, it's not just about projects and delivering projects, it's also about knowledge exchange, pulling farmers together, getting the farmers to talk to their neighbours, bring them along, go and see some great examples, learn from one another. And then it doesn't just become echo chambers of the same old the sort of ambitious landowners doing all the actions and hoovering up all the funds. It then starts to trickle through, and that peer pressure and that sort of momentum builds. And it's helped along by the likes of Lord Benyon coming to visit to see how the FIPL money's been distributed, HRH coming to Oakland Farm Ed, and lots of amazing speakers and brains that come out of Oxford and Farm Ed and so on. So it's my job to try and get that to every farmer, not just not the big estates, but every farmer across that catchment. Next slide, please. And that's it. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'm sure I can take at the end.
Thanks, Tim. It's me next, so Mark Connelly from the Cotswolds National Landscape, where I'm the land management lead. So this next little section is looking at one of the things we did pretty sort of, well, actually last year, so fairly early on in the project. And when we're setting up the program, one of the obvious questions was, well, what do we actually know about the catchment? So it was concluded that one of the things we ought to do was to actually create some kind of baseline by collecting together quite a wide range of data, but also converting those into maps as well. And we were doing this to sort of improve, next slide please, we were doing this to improve the understanding of the catchment, but also looking at the program beyond, guiding delivery of the catchment plan and any sort of future projects which may also come along afterwards too. There's a lot of data already out there. It was in all sorts of different locations. Some of it was sort of publicly available. Some of it was held by various organizations, study groups. Some of it we had to pay for. And we sort of decided the best thing to do was to just collate it together all in one single place. So we created a library of data in this, but we also used some of that too to create 10 maps for the Evenlode Catchment Partnership. So to do this through a sort of little of a process of, we did it a bit like a tender really, because it made sense to try and describe what we wanted and send it around. We commissioned Atkins to actually undertake the work for us. So next slide, please. Now, we sort of created an initial data list. We sort of broadly looked at it in 4 broad areas. So, you know, what the catchment, water quality, so things, simple things like, you know, the catchment boundary. All the data came mostly cut to the catchment with a 3-kilometre boundary. We also looked at sort of the administration side, so local authority boundaries, parish council boundaries. The third grouping here was landscape and heritage, so World Heritage Sites, scheduled monuments, landscape character, and the fourth group was the biodiversity and geodiversity sites, so tripartite, priority habitats, local wildlife, and so on. So the result of all this is actually 133 different data sets. 10 of those come with license agreements. They're the ones which are limited, but all the others there are available for use. And yeah, okay, so I cut to the catchment with a 3-kilometre boundary, so you can actually see a little bit of the periphery around the catchment. Nothing worse than actually having maps cut to an area and not seeing what is just on the other side of the boundary line. Next slide, please. We then looked at the maps, and there were 10 themes of the maps which were agreed to. I won't go through each one here. Some of them are quite complex and very colourful. Others were actually quite a revelation when we actually saw them, particularly I think when it came to looking at the things like sort of designations and the like. You know, adding in those local wildlife sites has made such a difference actually understanding what is actually in the catchment itself. And last slide, please. So that data library is held by Oxfordshire. The maps will be on the ECP webpage at some point, if not already, but if they're not there, they are also available from myself or at Berkeley. They individually range in size from 5 megabytes to 10 megabytes, so they are individually more or less emailable. But hopefully if they are on the web pages, then they'll be easily accessed there. So that's it from me on the data collection side. I'm handing over now to a colleague of mine from the National Landscape, James Webb.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. James Webb here from Cotswolds National Landscape, and I'm here today to talk about the education, access, and the community engagement aspects of the project. What I think is, before I start, what I think is really great about this particular theme is that it brings all 4 themes together. The children and the young people that the team are working with are doing lots of practical activity and learning on the water quality element, the biodiversity and the natural flood management. So it's the theme that really kind of binds it all together. So first slide, please. For the team, here they are. If you haven't met them already, just to quickly run through, we have Ruth on the left-hand side there, corporate background with a very successful career, currently studying for a degree at the RAU as well. And then in the middle, we have Roz, a former teacher who came out of the classroom, and she really believes the best way to learn is being outside. And then finally, Rowan on the right-hand side, he has a forest school background, lots of experience with children in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. So together, they really are the perfect team, great skill set and experience, highly professional, bring loads and loads of energy and enthusiasm to the project, and indeed the wider team here at Cotswolds National Landscape. Slide 2, please. So just to give you a quick insight into the kind of things that are happening on the ground. Well, first of all, there's an awful lot, a big range of activities and sessions for the students. The learning outcomes are all linked to the curriculum. The photo here shows A-level geography students at Coombe Mill. And you can tell from the photo that it was taken earlier in the year. There's hardly any leaves on the trees. And this is really just to illustrate how early delivery started within the project. The team were recruited in the autumn, and they began late November. Rowan joined us in January of this year, so delivery started within a couple of months. The demand has been really high. We're still in the pilot period up to September 22, but we're already fully booked with education sessions and community events, fairs and shows by May. So you know, sort of at least 6 weeks ago, we were already fully booked for this pilot period. And year one, which starts in September 22, the bookings for that from schools are really strong as well. So the demand is very high indeed. Next slide, please. So a nice little photo montage here for you. The delivery is happening a couple of times a week. The team have been out today, in fact, doing delivery, which is why I'm presenting on behalf of the team today. We've got a picture on the top left-hand side. This is a school trip to Didcot Sewage Treatment Works. Great day out. If you haven't been already, I do recommend it. The children are really taught by doing. So, for example, they do a simple experiment using bottles one with a toilet roll, one with kitchen roll, and one with a wet wipe, shaking it for 10 seconds to show how it breaks down or not, to illustrate what happens when these things go down the toilet. So it's really sort of simple but powerful learning that all the children get to take home and share with their family. We've mentioned the water quality element down in the picture on the bottom right-hand side. Children really like it when and get very excited when it goes bright pink. But of course, what that actually means is that it's a very high nitrate concentration. But again, that's all part of the learning. And there's also the yellow fish scheme as well that's painted on the drains to show what goes down the drain ends up in the river and ultimately in the sea as well. And what we've got in the picture with young people kind of clambering up the tree there is the Duke of Edinburgh students, and they're involved in lots of practical habitat management work, as well as work to facilitate sessions for other groups. Yeah, that's been really successful, and that's at Coombe Mill. Next slide, please. So in terms of the community outreach element, this is really starting to pick up now as we move into the high summer. The team have organised a series of guided walks in partnership with the Cotswold Voluntary Wardens, and the idea there is that the wardens lead the walk, and the team members are at different points in the walk stop to talk about different features within the river and the landscape itself, so that the members of the public can kind of learn about the river environment and, for example, the natural flood management systems that might be in place on that particular river. The last one in June, I think, had 15 members of the public, so they're really proving really popular, and we've got lots more events planned over the summer. So I'm just going to try and share screen now, if that's possible. So hopefully you can see that. Just to illustrate, the Everyone's Evenlode project is really our flagship education project, and we're really very proud of it indeed. So it sits on our website here, and here's the team. And again, it just to the list here, hopefully you can see that, but you know, there's several events, more than several events each and every month throughout July, August, September, going the right way down to the autumn. So that a whole mixture here of fairs, events, shows, guided walks, and so on. Right, back to the presentation, if that's possible. Wow, that worked seamlessly. Thank you very much. So the community outreach element of the project is reaching a really large and diverse audience, both within and outside the catchment. I think that's really important as well, that it's reaching, you know, a really broad geography. And the final slide, please. Great, thank you. So what we've got here is the output figures as at 30th of June, and a thank you note from one of the children that have taken part in the activities. So the numbers are big, really quite big. 563 primary school children already, and in fact these figures are now out of date because the team have been delivering today. So we're probably going to be over 600 now. Very high levels of engagement, and moreover the team are delivering really high quality learning outcomes, science-based, linked to the curriculum, and typically these are taught over a half day or a full-day session. Engagement with different age ranges is really good. Mixture of primary, secondary and older students, such as the DFE that you saw earlier on, Duke of Edinburgh. And with the older children in particular, they return for multiple sessions, and that's really important to kind of embed that learning. The feedback has been excellent from students and indeed the teachers, and you've got some examples here on the screen of some of the feedback we've captured from emails and so on. It's not just the learning that's important, of course, that's a big element of it. If you think about the last 2 years, schools have lost really 2 years of normal education. Many of the children that the team have spoken to have not been on a facilitated school trip like this. Some of them haven't even been on a coach before. So the whole experience that the project is giving them is really, really valuable. So looking ahead, I should say all of these results here are just from the last 6 months since the team have been in post. So they've really had a cracking start. Looking ahead, we've got a busy summer, the remainder of the academic year, the next couple of weeks. Then the community work really gets going, very busy. And then the team will use the summer to evaluate pilot period and plan for a full academic year from September 22. So thank you very much for your support. And I believe I'm handing over to Anne Miller next.
Hello, thank you very much. This has been just a stellar review, I think, of all the different things that have been going on in the Catchment Partnership. So a huge thank you on behalf of everybody, to everybody for sharing so clearly and succinctly such a mass of activity that's gone on. My name's Anne Miller, obviously. I'm another of the founder members of the Catchment Partnership. And I can only say I'm absolutely delighted to see how much it's grown and grown, a real regenerative activity in its own right. What I want to be able to do now is to answer any questions or field to the panel questions that you might have for us. So really, if we can put everybody back onto screen so that we can see who's there. There are 1 or 2 little questions came up in the chat, particularly Adam, I think, asking us about whether we'd be able to share some of the PhDs. But if there are other questions that people would like now to come on, either come on to switch on your video and switch off the mute and speak up, or alternatively put something into the chat. We're happy to take it either way. Helena, could you move us on to being able to see everybody else's faces? Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you. So questions, please fire them at us. We're keen to answer. Roselle. No, that's my hand, not yours. Sorry. Anybody got a question that they would like to ask? Yes, Nick, please feel free to come off mute.
Yes. Can you hear me, Anne?
I can indeed. Yep.
Yep. Brilliant. Good. Thank you very much. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Well, two sort of techie questions, and then sort of maybe just a general observation. So on the techie questions first, right back at the beginning of the presentation, there was one of those sort of lovely pictures of water shooting across a field, sort of, and spilling out onto whatever bit of surrounding landscape was nearby. There are certainly these sort of acute areas dotted around the catchment where we do have sort of, catastrophic loss of soil off fields. Does anyone have a view as to where those sort of acute points are in spatial terms is my question. And then I guess would be, is there anything that we could collectively do to particularly target those areas? And I'm also sort of approaching it with sort of an NFM flooding hat on as well. So that's sort of one question. While I'm hogging, yeah, or I can say the other one as well. It's two different questions, then you can sort of think what the answer is. But anyway, yeah, go for that one first then.
I think that one. So I think that we've also got a resource that Atkins worked up as part of the river restoration scheme, and I'm just trying to think it's called Working with Nature in the Evenlode, and they've got a map there that shows the areas where soils are most vulnerable, and it's generally on the higher, steeper slopes. So I hope that so if you can get onto that website, then I would have a look at that. It really highlights the areas.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Tim has a response
let
as
someone
well.
else. Yeah.
Just to make.
Sorry, Nick. Do you want to ask the second question, or do you want me to give my thoughts on the first one?
Stick with this one, and then I'll maybe sort of come in at the end with my other question if other people have sort of also got questions.
In terms of the solution, obviously identifying them, that's sort of being mapped in the steep slopes and the opportunities for reconnection and so on. But I think what we've heard today is that there's a whole suite of options, and that there's no one silver bullet to solving all of the challenges. And I'd say that's the same with identifying water shooting through fields and washing away the topsoil. It could be different solutions in different contexts, whether it's but I think between Ellen and her team and Joe and myself and Anne, there are a whole suite of different options. And I think that's what, I'm praying that we get landscape recovery, because there's so much great work that this can then just be rolled out and then be a showcase to the rest of the country, actually. So yeah, that would be my short answer. Sorry, it wasn't very short.
And there's a very helpful, Heather's just posted the link to the soil erosion map in the chat, Nick, as well.
Okay, cool, thanks.
So fire away with the question.
Yeah. Well, I say I'll maybe hold that and let other people sort of come in with their questions. But can I just make a comment first? And that, for those that don't know, I also have the pleasure of acting as chairman for the wider Evenlode Catchment Partnership. And unless I don't have the opportunity before sort of the meeting ends, I would just like to say, sort of on behalf of that wider partnership, to express admiration, thanks, amazing just sort of gratitude for all the hard work that all the partner members are taking place, all the hard work that's gone into putting this presentation together. I'm involved, although not as closely as some, but even so, it's amazing how much stuff is now starting to come on stream. So, well done to all involved, well done to the steering group, to Wild Oxfordshire. We mustn't forget that sort of the catchment partnerships are here because the Environment Agency a long time ago started to come behind them and come behind that approach. So again, thanks to VA for continuing their involvement, and Thames Water. Again, where the Smarter Water Catchment Partnership would not be here without that sort of additional funding. And we know all the challenges that come, sort of with the management of sort of the assets. But some really amazing things are being done here, and hopefully there is a lot of good stuff that will be gained and spread much more widely around the country. So once again, thank you all very much on behalf of the wider ECP partnership.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for that. Can I ask if there are other questions? Anybody else like to put their hand up? I can see Jonathan, you're looking as though you're poised to say something. No, he's shaking his head.
Shall I ask my second question then? I can't believe there's only 2 questions. You've obviously done too good a job. I think it was Owen's, sorry, I forget exactly whose presentation it was, but raised that really tricky question of the challenge that we have in terms of sewage treatment capacity and housing development. Now, I'm coming at this sort of with my sort of local authority and planning hat on, and we're all aware of the housing pressure that is potentially coming not just to Oxfordshire but all around the country. We're aware of the challenges that come, whether it be in terms of spatially or in terms of investment, with actually making sure that the sewage treatment capacity is up there. I just would be interested to know, and I don't know who is the response is from, but sort of where are conversations at in terms of trying to match those 2 things together?
Well, yeah, I might answer that, and anyone else can come in for further comment after. But we're having really good relationships with Thames Water recently, and they have, taken a new approach to how they manage their assets over the last few decades, which is really, heartening to see. I would say that, Thames Water are very transparent in what they're saying. We have regular meetings and discussions with Thames Water and wider water industry partners on a bi-weekly basis. So I think we're taking good steps towards in upgrading our treatment works, and there has been commitments from Thames Water to upgrade treatment works in the new AMP cycle, which will be in the next 5 years or so. So I would say, because of the transparency and the open discussions, I'm quite hopeful that at least some or several sewage treatment works do get upgraded in the next 5 to 7 years. So I suppose as well, we ask, the wider public and especially communities in the Evenlode to, make sure that they, write to their MPs, the water industry and other authorities to make sure that these, commitments are upheld. So I would say I'm quite hopeful for sewage treatment works to be upgraded in the next 5 to 7 years. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so that's very helpful to know. Doesn't quite sort of get to the point where I was going to.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Anne, if that's okay, partially in response to Nick's question, but also sort of touching on a little bit what Owen was saying. So we've got 4 upgrade schemes that we've got on Evenlode sewage works in what we call this AMP period, so from 2020 to 2025, looking at storage capacity on site as well as increasing the actual flow that can be treated at those sites. The way that the planning process works, and I'm sure we can circulate the notes as well, that we've done collaboratively on where the kind of latest ECP position is on that. We could definitely circulate that for your benefit, Nick. But the way Thames have historically done it, and the planning process is retrospective to the kind of future. We will account for a certain amount of capacity upgrades, capacity within a catchment, if there are known and kind of new housing that are known to us, we will look at that point. But as Owen says, we are committing to upgrading more of those sewage works from 2025 onwards, and we're just going through that process as a group now, and we'll embark for the next few months to really pinpoint where those priority sewage works should be. just given the kind of balance that we would have to do across the whole company with sewage treatment works and the amount of money that we are allowed by Ofwat. So we will go through that process over the next few months.
Thank you. Adam, I'm going to ask you to speak, and then Tim, is that okay?
Hello, thanks. So I'm Adam Bowes. I'm from the Freshwater Habitats Trust. We're the host for the Eoghan Catchment and co-host for the River Thames with the River Thames Conservation Trust. So yeah, I just wanted to say brilliant presentations. It's incredibly useful to understand the scale of what can be delivered, you know, with the resources that have been put in. So you've set the bar very high, but we'll certainly be looking to take what you've done and sort of apply that to the Eoghan with the extra CAPS funding that's just come through, which we're really, really delighted about. I think that's going to really change the scale and the ambition of what we can deliver. I suppose it's a bit of a topical question, really, but you mentioned it was a fascinating presentation about sort of river restoration, and you talked about analog beaver dams. So I was just wondering what's going on kind of anywhere in the catchment for bringing in real beavers. I know it's topical and controversial, but yeah, just really interested to know what anybody's doing in the catchment, especially the Tim and the farmer cluster. I mean, that was really good. I'd like to talk to you offline separately about that, but yeah, beavers.
Well, would anybody like to answer that one? Perhaps Tim, you can say something about what the farmer cluster view is. I think there are certainly human beaver analogues in Charlbury, but I'm interested to know if real beavers are around.
Anyone else want to comment before I do?
Do you want me to just very quickly say, because apologies, Jo had to go early, so she's not on this question panel, which is a shame, but as far as we know, we're actually still waiting to hear what DEFRA are going to say about beaver release. We'd really, really keen to have them in the Evenlode, but there's nothing actually concretely planned at the moment, so we're kind of watching the space.
It's a really interesting one, actually. Yeah, and Adam, thank your colleague Jeremy for coming in on the landscape recovery bid. It's great to have the trust's name in there. Beavers are wonderfully divisive, so we decided not to use the B word in the bid. But there's not a day that doesn't go by without I'm part of the countryside stewardship facilitation funding going forward, and there's a specific element of that which is dedicated to beaver release and beaver landowner management. There is huge enthusiasm from some quarters, just not universal yet. But I think the nature of beaver releases is going to have to be quite limiting and restricted to begin with anyway, so that suits. And to be honest, by the time we planted, cover your ears, anyone in the AOMB, however many trees we're going to plant over the next 20 years, very sensitively. The habitat will lend itself much better perhaps down the line than it does right at the moment, except there are some very well wooded estates that could definitely host and are already looking at it. So fingers crossed. But I think we should not wait for the beavers is probably the short, the take-home message, but start to think about how beavers could be in a longer vision introduced. While I've got the mic, I'm just going to follow up the previous point, the second question that Nick asked, and follow it up with a question myself is, what's going on down in Dorset and Poole Harbour with nutrient neutrality and the connectivity between planning and pressure on rivers and phosphate levels and so on. Is there a solution there to start a bit of nutrient neutrality, just as we are biodiversity net gain within planning of new developments? That's back at you, Nick, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's not something which I think is hugely on the radar at the moment. The reason I was asking my question was, however, I think, my sense is that things are changing within the sort of the planning process, and there is an appetite certainly to be thinking more widely. I mean, okay, we know that biodiversity net gain is coming in as sort of a statutory thing. We know that sort of the nutrient neutrality bit, if I understand correctly, has run to a little bit of a problem, not least because it starts to cause problem for delivering your housing allocations, which I guess is sort of what the purpose of it was. So there is a tension there. So I don't see it as sort of something for which there is an immediate easy solution, but my sense is that there is certainly more openness for thinking about those things and working out how we feed those back into the planning process. And I think that's where I was sort of coming with my question about the sewage treatment works is, yes, I understand sort of how the process had worked and it tends to be retrospective, just trying to think, well, is there a way we can get it sort of more onto the front foot and start to identify where the problems are, what the solutions are, and what needs to come either with or from development in order to make these, these new developments more acceptable in the very widest sense.
It speaks very much to a comment that Charlotte's put in the box, in the chat here. We were having a conversation just this morning in the water quality group about what we could do in this area, and there's certainly, Charlotte, I don't know if you want to say anything to that, and then I'll let Ellen speak.
Yeah, I'll just put my camera on. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, we were looking at how we can take the information that we've gathered within the water quality group and create and share some of that knowledge. And one of the areas that we're looking at is around housing and planning, because we know that that it's very difficult for the water utility companies to not connect new housing, but we know at the same time within the Evenlode that there's a considerable amount of new housing being built and has been built, and that the sewage works are already at or well over capacity. So it's about taking the information, condensing it, and then producing information that we can share with some of the decision makers so that people are more informed. And I think what we'd like to do as well is share this information more widely outside of our catchment, so other groups or catchments can also share and have their knowledge updated as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. That's really helpful. Ellen, you've been patiently waiting with your hand up.
It was just to add to the beaver debate. I think after the consultation, which obviously has been delayed, the results of the consultation, which were due this year, I think, however, it is looking very positive. I think that, after the River Otter trial, that was a really positive response that we had. And with the 25-year environment plan, beavers were given legal protection. So I think these are all very positive space, a very positive space to be in. And hopefully, as Natural England will hopefully be providing the licenses for the beaver reintroduction, hopefully we'll be the first to hear if there is some positive news to share with you all. So yeah, hopefully just watch this space.